we're going to do well here. I think that's right.
And I'm talking to Mr. Ernie Foster.
Yeah, it is the Wednesday, it's the 5th. Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Ernie Foster of Hatteras Island in Hatteras Village. Okay, Mr. Foster, you grew up in this village, correct?
That is correct.
And your father is quite well known, and he grew up here too?
Yes.
And
In fact, all of my grandparents were born here on the island. So.
Up and down the island,
Yeah.
or?
Yeah, my mother was from Waves, and my father's from Hatteras.
Okay. Yeah, so how did they meet?
I don't know how the first meeting went. I know how they courted because my father told me that over and over again.
Right.
He was fishing. He had his boat and he was fishing, and he and another fellow both had ended up with girlfriends in Waves. And he would come in from fishing. Fred, the other fellow, had a Model A, and they would drive the sand since there were no roads.
Right.
Drive to Waves and I guess date or courting at the time basically meant just kind of sitting on the porch and then turn around and drive back about 3 times a week. All in the sand. There was no paving.
What decade was that?
That was in the that was in the 40s.
Ah, okay. And so there must have been activities between the villages for them to meet girls and Waves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was you're sharing a common place, and there were with the various and sundry nightclubs and so forth, which is not where they met, I'm sure.
Right.
But one of the things, and this is not something that I remember other than them talking about it, one of the big socializing events would be the revival meetings.
Oh, right.
The camp revivals, in which people from Hatteras would load up equipment, the camp meeting, the old traditional camp meeting, and would go up the banks or down the banks, which is how they referred to it, and stayed apparently for like 4 or 5 days.
Wow.
And part of it was the religious services at night, but I suspect a big draw was the chance to interact.
Right, with the other villagers.
Yeah.
And what was the religion of the camp meetings?
Originally it was Methodist. It wasn't the first the religion. The dominant religion was Methodist, and I don't know when it came. The Pentecostals came.
Right.
And at that point
Is
there
that
were two.
Assembly of God?
Assembly of God, yeah.
Right.
The
So
Assembly of God.
That's a big presence.
When I was a boy, there were 2 churches, there were 2 denominations all up and down the island, and proportionally, I would guess they were about evenly split. That's just a guess.
2 denominations of the whole island?
Yeah, you had Methodist and you had Assembly of God. That was it.
Yeah.
And it was a very very homogeneous group.
Now, it would surprise me that if the Methodist was first, and people obviously belonged to the various Methodist churches forever and ever and ever, and then this new religion comes in, I wonder what inspired people to switch.
Well, now, I don't know this. In fact, I went to a funeral yesterday. The lady that lives over here died at 1 week shy of her 99th birthday. And it was interesting in the bulletin for her funeral, they mentioned her church affiliation, and she had at one time belonged to the Northern Methodist Church and then switched to the Southern Methodist Church, because during the Civil War there was a big, there was a split between Northern and Southern Methodist, and Hatteras had 2 Methodist churches, Northern Methodist, Southern Methodist, and there was a split.
And it had to do with whether you're on the Yankee side or the Confederate side on this?
That is how it took place. My speculation is that there was the politics of who gets chance to make the decision, and one group wanted to make the decision, the other group wanted to make the decision, and it didn't have much to do with theology and a lot to do with power.
Right.
That's my guess, because they combined them, I guess, right about the World War II, maybe just before then. I know my father bought the church. I guess it was And I don't know which one won out. They just became that's where the term United Methodist Church came from.
Oh, really? Because that's all over the
Yeah.
nation,
Mhm.
isn't it?
Yeah, they remerged.
So this northern-southern split was all over the place. It wasn't just...
My understanding, I'm not a historian, but that's my awareness. And I remember my father. Of course, as a kid, you don't know the tensions that go on with the adults. And when they built the new church, there were the two churches about the same age. One of them he bought just to have the land and tore the building down. It was disrepair, but the bell was great. So he has this bell. And when they built the new church, which is the brick church here in the village, they got ready to put the bell in. The question is, do you just use the old bell or the new bell? My father says, gee, the bell from this church has such a nice tone. It's superior.
Right.
But the powers that be, no way.
Really?
Now, given that little bit of window of what was going on and the politics of it, I would assume that at about the time the church merged, I to as the kind of the better term, there's more fervor,
So that probably appealed.
and that appealed to some folks. I don't know what some of the others are.
Yeah.
Um,
And you,
Yes. Fair number.
Uh-huh.
Things are not like they used to be.
Do you remember when there were no roads, or when there was just sandy
Just
roads?
barely. I remember. What I was in 48 or 49, so I was 3 or 4, and my memory was just, that's
What year were you born?
I was born in 45.
Huh?
They paved it from literally right where you turn to go to my boats. It was the oldest asphalt in the island is right there.
Really?
And they paved from there to Avon, to where you turn to go into the village.
The oldest asphalt is right by
Yeah, that's where they started.
the historical marker.
Yeah.
The oldest asphalt.
So the road started there and it went to Avon. So this stretch on down here, my home was on down about 3/4 mile. It was just a single lane sand road.
Right.
And that was, I guess I was about 7, I think, when they finally paved it on down there. I remember that very vividly.
Right.
And at about that time, they also paved from Avon on up to Oregon Inlet. But prior to that, when my mother and I went to, we'd go up to visit my grandparents,
Right.
and we didn't have a car, so we'd take the bus.
Was that?
Anderson.
That must have been.
I have remained fascinated by a circumstance in this day and age with all the various and sundry OSHA and political correctness. It 15 or so, and they're running a bus service, and no one in the community thought that it was odd or strange or somehow wrong or they need to be regulated. Man, thank God someone's running a bus.
Yeah.
There were a couple of enterprising kids who could do the job.
Right.
And it required, of course, then when you didn't have paved roads, you didn't have driver's license. People on the island did not have to have driver's license. You literally could go to Norfolk. You didn't have tags on your car.
Really?
Well, you had no paved roads. What are you paying for?
Right, it's all beach and trail.
And you could go to Norfolk if you put a sign. I'm from Hatteras Island. They would. No one would even. You didn't get a ticket. You just had free reign.
Oh my gosh.
So to go from that circumstance to where we are now, where you can't even twitch without the appropriate documentation,
Right.
and it is necessary. I mean, I'm not.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not. I'm happy that we have what we have now, but there was something to be said for the kind of freedom that would allow that kind of enterprise.
Yeah, right. And they were kids. Like
They were kids, but they didn't. I mean, they didn't act irresponsibly. They were running a business. They couldn't be irresponsible.
Yeah. Gosh. And I've interviewed some folks up from Waves and Salvo area. They're always talking about the bus going down to Hatteras. What purpose was the village of Hatteras back then? Was this a big commerce center, or was it just a fishing, or it seemed like people were always going to Hatteras?
At Hatteras, this village has functioned as a village more so than the other villages on the island. Hatteras had the first power plant, electric power. Hatteras had a guy came here and built a combination ice plant and power plant, which provided refrigeration as well as electricity, which radically altered life.
What was the name of that ice plant?
I can't think of the name of it, and I have it. I've got it. I have it written in on one of the pictures over there.
Hi, Barbara Blake.
Nice to see you, Barbara.
Sorry to call interrupting you.
Oh, that was almost over, but it's just that I wasn't able to go run looking for it.
Yeah. Well,
Were you at the net house?
No, I was over to that. She pulled up with the boats, and there I was. I'd been out in the yard, and I was kind of cleaning up the truck a little bit, and then I went up to the post office and was not going anywhere
All
over
right,
here.
well, glad you found each other. I'll let you guys get on.
Well, thank you.
Oh, gee.
I saw reference to it. Write it down. I was looking at this old
I
photographs.
cannot and I have it written down over one of the pictures you were looking at. I had it written in there, and I don't remember I know the guy that did it his name was Tom Eaton. I remember that.
Uh-huh.
But I can't remember, well, regardless.
Yeah.
So Hatteras had that going on. There was a doctor that was here,
Right.
and he provided medical services for the entire island.
What, do you remember his name?
Well, there were several of them. Oh shucks.
I'm asking all the hard questions, aren't
Well,
I?
no, I'm reaching that point where just things falling through.
About 10 years ago.
Yeah. The heck. One of them will come to me in a minute.
Right.
My father drove for one of them. And of course, they made house. He made house calls. You call when you got sick. You call the doctor's
He drove his boat for the doctor, or he drove
car.
the car? Ah.
And he drove the doctor's car for him, and it took a certain amount of skill to drive well in the sand. And if you had experience, you could do pretty well with it.
Mm-hmm.
And all the local guys were, from the time once they could get around the car,
He knew what they were
you
doing.
know what they're doing, just like
Yeah.
the Midget brothers and
Right.
everybody else. You were a decent sand driver.
Uh-huh.
This is the four-wheel drive, each tire.
Yeah.
So, but they. Right. In fact, my and you're asking about how my father met my. For the doctor for a while, and they made regular calls up there.
Mm-hmm.
In addition, my mother's parents, my grandparents, had a little store, and that was one of the stopping points. And back,
Where was the store?
it was in Waves,
In Waves. Yeah.
and when you were traveling up. You would typically stop even after the place was paved and there's not necessarily a reason to stop.
Mm-hmm.
It was fairly common that, well, we'll stop here and just kind of visit.
Right.
People would stop in and maybe buy a Pepsi or a gallon of gas and chat for 20 minutes and go on.
Right. So they could keep up with
Keep up with what was, see, almost everyone, the vast majority of islanders knew each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that was throughout the villages.
Right. So did you notice a sort of distinct personality difference between the villages?
Yeah, but I mean, there was competition, and there was always the sense that, well, we're different from them.
Right.
And that just goes on everywhere.
Uh-huh.
Moorhead and Beaufort,
Right.
take your pick. I mean, small, any place.
Right. But as a boy, when you go up to Waves,
Well,
it's
see,
different?
yeah, it was different. Hatteras is more of a village, and Wave was just some houses strung along. But I had lots of family there, and I was as welcome there as I was here. Some of the traditions were different. A very significant difference was at Christmas time. Those three villages, Waves, Rodanthe, and Salvo, celebrated Old Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And Hatteras, nobody did. I mean, that was just totally different in that regard.
Yeah. I guess just different histories or different families?
Yeah, I haven't a clue as to why that tradition stayed up there and faded away faster in Hatteras. The possible exception, Hatteras, because it had the inlet and we had commerce, the freight boats ran in and out on a regular basis. It attracted a greater number of outsiders, forever. Civil, and I'm speculating here. I'm just, going off a tangent sort of. The Civil War, the first place in North Carolina that was reclaimed by the federal forces was Hatteras Village. You know, they landed down here. And you had some carpetbaggers who came, who were administrators, and I don't know how that played itself out. I know that one of them was a Foster, and I don't know, that may have been my great-grandfather on his side, I don't know. But when the fishing started, which is kind of when I remember, and that's when my father got going, we had all these outside sportsmen coming in on a regular basis, and you had a window to the outside world.
Mm-hmm.
And I would think that because of that, I don't know if Hatteras was more apt to change.
Right. As opposed to those more isolated.
Yeah, those villages were literally more isolated. But prior to the bridge,
Right.
they were significantly more isolated because prior to the bridge, you know, the island shut down at night. You know, you couldn't get on and off.
Right.
And if you came to the doctor, you came this way.
Okay.
And
Is this sort of like an informal county seat in a way?
I wouldn't describe it like that. In fact, Hatteras is not very political. There have been very few politicians from Hatteras. It was just really more of a sense of communal living, and I'm using that in the broadest sense.
Yeah.
But you would have this, in my lifetime, some of the things that were certainly significant to me in watching it develop. We had a fire, this house right over right past this one, the house that was there caught on fire. The guy had a motel, single story at the time. This was in, I think, 58. I know it was when the Braves were in the World Series with War and Spire because I was listening to it. The house catches on fire. We didn't have a fire department. We couldn't get the thing put out. They were able to keep it down to the point where the fire did not spread, but the man lost his house. Well, by the next year, we had a great fire department. And it was door-to-door donations, monthly donations. Women would go door-to-door and collect the money, and fish fries in the summertime. That's how we paid for it. When the schools were consolidated, we were left with a school building that had no function as a school building. Well, the community organized the Civic Association, which still exists. That's how we govern ourselves as a community. And several ladies decided we needed a library. So they gathered up books and staffed this library purely by volunteer effort, totally by volunteer effort. Now, we had the bookmobile that would come down. When I was a kid, the bookmobile would pull up. That was a big deal. You had to pick a book.
Right.
But these people, created a library. So I had one room and not a lot of books, but it was a library, and it was entirely community effort, no outside help or resources. When the public health doctor was taken off the island, the island had no doctor. People in Hatteras Village got together, built the medical center, and recruited a doctor.
Why did they take the public worker off?
I'm assuming we reached a point government-wise where it was deemed not to be a necessary service to provide anymore. I don't know. Again, I don't know the history of that.
Right.
But they did away with the public health doctor.
Oh my gosh.
So Hatteras created its own hospital.
Did you have midwives as well?
Not that I'm aware of, but that wasn't something that I was much privy to.
In a hospital?
I was born in a hospital. I was born in Portsmouth Naval Hospital during World War II.
Wow.
In fact, right at the end of it, when I was born, the Germans surrendered. In May of '45.
Was your father in the military?
He was in the Coast Guard.
Oh. And before he was in the Coast Guard, was he doing the guiding and the fishing,
Yeah.
or was that after?
He started before. He had the first boat built in '37, and the first year I think he said he ran 4 trips. But then business picked up a lot, and it was going along very well. Then the war years came on, and he ended up. He was about to get drafted. Interestingly, the 2 oldest men in the village got drafted first, but and politics.
Yeah.
That's part of it.
Right.
But one of his customers was the commandant of the Coast Guard, and another one of his customers was the congressman. And he said, "Yeah, I think I'd be better served in the Coast Guard." And he had the requisite skills. We needed trained people, and you can't train a waterman in 6 months' time, or in about 90 days. So he ended up working. He was served as a bosun mate.
Which he was
on
already
small-
very
And he was
familiar.
he was already a skilled boat handler, as long as you kept him on a relatively small boat, say 60 feet on down.
Now, did he get to choose because of his customer connections, or did everybody get to choose?
Well, you could enlist back then.
Right.
You know, he enlisted
Okay.
and was not hurt any by his connection. And it was a proper placement. You take a guy with that. I don't know if he went to boot camp. Well, he had been in the Coast Guard in Prohibition days up in Long Island.
Mm-hmm.
But they just basically took him out and put him on a boat, and they had a guy that could run the boat.
Ah, right.
So that was a wise use of his talent.
Right. Let's just break for one little second.
That was nice when we built the house.
Did you ever go to Old Christmas as a boy?
Mm-hmm.
What was your impression of that?
It was a lot of fun. You get a chance to ride Old Buck.
I've heard about Old Buck.
But I was, my experience was the same as those. You probably have heard people talk about how rough the folks were up there.
I've heard people
Yeah.
say that sometimes there was brawling,
Mm-hmm.
and people would take care of their grudges that night or that day.
Yeah, I guess it was mostly a bunch of young drunks, and they would, if you were not from there, you had a greater chance of being involved. But you know, half of my family, my grandfather and my mother was from there, and my grandfather and grandmother were from there, and I had 5 or 6. My mother had 5 or 6 uncles and aunts that lived there, and they all had children. So I had a bunch of second cousins.
Now,
So-
what were your grandparents' names?
They were midgets.
Uh-huh.
In fact, they were both midgets before they got married. So
Really? Yeah.
my grandmother was one of her brother was the last keeper at Chicamacomico.
Ah.
And my great-grandfather was Rasmus Midget, the life-saving guy.
Right. Okay. And so, is your mother still alive?
No, she passed away a few years ago. She's about dead now.
And did she stay in Waves the whole? Oh, she was here.
Yeah.
She was down here. What was her name?
Her name is Hazel.
Hazel Midget.
Hazel
And then
Midget
she met
Foster.
your father.
Yeah.
Okay. Is Foster a big name for Hatteras?
Not really. There's one family. There's another family has moved in since then, but we were the only family.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an island name with a long history behind it. My father was one of 7 children.
He was
But-
born here.
Yeah. And my great-grandfather died when my grandfather was a little boy. He said he had only just the briefest recollection of him on the Foster side.
Right.
Now, on my grandmother's side, she was a Balance, and Balance is a name that's spread throughout the area.
Right.
But you were talking earlier about the differences. It is interesting if you look at the rosters of the life-saving stations.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell. I can tell where the station is if I look at the roster. You take the roster, say back in the 40s.
Right.
You can say, well, you can watch it go down the island or up the island if you put them in order.
How can you tell?
Well, the names, midget, and you come to Grays, Meekins, and you get a mixture of Meekins and Grays and
In
Scarboroughs,
Avon.
yeah. You get a few Dailies thrown in, you're in Buxton.
Right.
And you get to Hatteras, and you're going to see some Balances and Styrons
And Burris.
and Burris,
Yeah.
Burris's. And you're going to Ocracoke, you're going to see Gaskells and
O'Neills.
O'Neills and Styrons. So you can watch it change.
Now, did you have any connection with Ocracoke at all, or was that like another?
Very
whole other-
limited. Very
So
limited.
close, though.
Very close. It is interesting. We're 15 miles or less from Ocracoke Village right now.
Right.
You have kind of an affinity for, and there's a connectedness because you share a common heritage, I guess.
Right.
And there's interaction, but it was not constant. There are folks from here who've married there and back and forth. And where the connections come is that people would tend to marry from another village.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's some kind of genetic encoding that the whole world has.
Right. That you shouldn't marry somebody
Yeah,
from
you
your own
don't
village 'cause
you don't
never
marry
know.
your cousin. But there was not a tremendous amount of interaction. And part of it was simply a matter of convenience. You had to get there by boat.
Oh, right.
Whereas here on the island, you could get there by walking or by horse.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately you could get there easily by car.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was a boy, the ferry consisted of taking a boat and putting a platform on it and taking boards for a ramp and running the car up on the boat and getting it to the Ocracoke and just running the thing off into shallow water, and off you went. There were no docks of any kind over there.
Gosh. So the Ocracokers were very much unto themselves.
Very much.
Yeah. Wow. Do you remember when people had those little sail skiffs? I mean, that was a mode of transportation.
Yes, I do. But when I was a kid, that was when the transition was taking
Right.
place. I remember sailing with my grandfather and his brother up in waves. They still had a sail skiff and
Mhm.
fished it. But that was one of the last ones.
Right. And they weren't there. I forget what you call them, net houses or net sheds or fishing sheds everywhere, or places where people would keep all their equipment, sort of like little camps.
Yeah, net house, fish. They call them fish camps or
Fish
net
camps.
house. Yeah, fish
Do you
camps.
remember those?
Mhm.
Those
Yeah, they were all up and down.
on this side or the south
They're
side?
on the sand side, where our boats are. My father bought a guy's net house or fish camp,
Right.
and bought right next to it was a commercial fish house.
Mhm.
Those two pieces of property, they were brothers,
Right.
and he bought that so that we could have our own docks for our boats.
And were they out in the water?
No, the harbor had been dredged out.
Okay.
But they were built very close to the waters so that you didn't have to lug your gear all over the place. But
Right.
you had to have some place to put your nets out of the weather when you were not using them.
Mhm.
And they didn't have any kind of electricity, just a shed.
Oh,
You know,
right.
it was a shed. Just powder. I love the smell of them.
Really? What
Yeah.
did it smell like?
Well, they'd have tarred nets in there, and just the old. It smelled like that piece of cotton net that's kind of dried out.
Oh, right.
And you'd have some of the dried seaweed smell and fish smell. I don't know why I
Yeah.
liked it, but it was. When we were kids, there were several of them around. We'd get in there and tell jokes and whatever.
Yeah,
Hang out. Yeah, a little hideout.
What, did they lime the nets? Is that one thing?
Yeah, you would with cotton nets. You had to lime them to kill the fish slime.
Okay, and so they would do that every day or once a week?
Yeah,
or?
when they come in from fishing, they would at least once, I guess, every couple of days.
Ah.
And they go out in the sand and mix up, use the salt water and pour lime in it and make a solution, just pour it all over the nets and let it run off. In fact, the first baseball game that a school from Cape Hatteras ever played, we had a ball diamond out here. It took place when I was in high school. And we had to have lines. And my father had this, I guess it's about a 55-barrel drum of lye.
Uh-huh.
And we took that out there and took Dixie cups and poured that stuff out
You
to
did?
line our foul lines.
Is it
And that-
lye or lime?
It's lime. It's not really lime, but it's fairly caustic. Well, it kills off the slime.
Yeah, right.
Probably would not fly too well. Having a bunch of kids out with Dixie cups running that stuff out.
No. And what about the tar? They also tar
Okay,
them?
you tarred your nets if you were pound nets.
Ah,
And any net that was going to spend some time immersed rather than just in and out, the nets that you're talking about liming them, they would be the gill nets that are used traditionally, in which you either just leave it overnight or you run it out and leave it for an hour or so and then bring it back in the boat.
I see, right.
Whereas a pound net stays there for the length of the season.
Right. Do you remember, I went on a flight with Mr. Dwight Burris, and he showed me the remains of an old porpoise factory.
Mhm.
Do you remember that?
No,
Was that before? That was
that
before.
was way before my
That was maybe
time.
in the 30s or the 20s or the 10s.
Gosh, it was in I think it was the 20s. My father, he signed on for that duty. In fact, he was with him when it shut down.
He was on the crew?
Yeah. On the last, he was there when it shut down.
And who was the crew leader?
I don't know. And are you familiar with the weather bureau that the Park Service is restoring up next to the Red and White?
A little bit.
I saw something in I think it was in the paper a couple of weeks ago when they tore out some of those walls that had been added. They found basically a compartment that had been didn't shut off, and in the papers was a ledger from the porpoise factory regarding a phone call that had been made to a guy named Nye who owned the oil. They called it Nye Oil after the guy that owned the factories.
Really? Like
So-
NYE?
Yeah. And I thought that was kind of interesting. They ran across this artifact. So the Park Service has that at their disposal. So
And they
you
just found that?
Yep, that little piece of, I don't know what they found there, but they had, when they petitioned off something, or they apparently just closed off a tiny closet. I don't know the circumstances, but it was just lost.
I wonder why it was in the weather station.
They probably had a telegraph, and they went there, and because they were calling to, they were going to Mandio with the message, and my assumption is that he had several of these factories up and down the Outer Banks, and I think when they reached a certain level of product, then he would come on a freight boat and pick them up, or have someone pick them up.
Okay.
So they were calling, and I'm guessing from what little I read that they were calling in their catch to let him know.
Right. Was that
Where
an
they were.
article in the Island Breeze about that?
No, I think I saw it in the pilot or something. Just a brief, not just a brief piece.
Yeah. So there was more than one porpoise factory on Hatteras Island?
Not to my knowledge, this was the only one on Hatteras,
Okay.
but there may have been one on up Currituck or somewhere. I think there were
Right.
several up and down the coast.
Maybe one down, I don't know if Harper's Island had one or not. I heard one down there somewhere. And so I can imagine that. I read an old interview of a man named Dameron Gray,
Mm-hmm.
and he was talking about the porpoise fishery. And from what he said, I gather that they would fish for the porpoises on the beach, and then they would haul them up on shore, and then would they skin them on the beach right there? And
They
then
kill them, butcher them.
butcher them.
And they had the oil. It's the same thing as the way, all the mammals have basically a socket in their skull where they have the oil,
Okay.
and that's all they wanted. So they would kill them and just basically, I don't know the exact procedure. I've never cut a porpoise open.
They must have carted the
They
fat,
they
the
pull them up.
slabs.
Yeah, I don't know if they boil the fat off or not, but they would bring it. The factory was out here in the Sound, and they had where they tried to do their fishing was up here just north of the village, where it's pretty narrow, and they had a flagman here and a flagman house several miles apart, and they had their boat in the middle.
Oh, yeah.
And when he saw the porpoises coming, whichever way he would raise the flag so they could get their nets out and get ready. My father said the thing he found interesting, they had to keep moving it because the porpoises would reach a point very quickly where they'd move out around the area where they've been.
They have that
caught the last
sonar
time.
thing.
Well, they also learn, and this is a bad place to be. And the reason for doing that is because though the island is much more narrow now than it was then, it still was not that far to haul the stuff from the ocean side up, so you get it in a boat, which made transport easier.
Right.
They go around Durance Point and down to the factory.
Mm-hmm.
And the factory was in a place where the water was deep enough so the freight boat could pull right up to the docks, take the product.
Now, is this Nye fellow living here?
No, he was from New England.
Oh,
Yeah.
but they would maybe get their wages from that factory,
Mhm.
that company,
Yeah.
would send the payroll
Right.
on a boat or something.
Yeah, I would assume there's some pretty good records somewhere, but I don't know
Yeah.
much
It's
about
just
it. And my
so
father, he just knew that it was a job, and he didn't like it because he didn't like it when they'd stick the porpoises because they'd squeal. He said it reminded him of killing a pig or something.
Yeah, well, this interview with Dameron Gray said that sometimes they would leave them overnight.
Mm-hmm.
And, we think so differently about animals these days. Dolphins and turtles are so sacred.
You don't think a porpoise factory would work too well this day and age?
It would go over real big. To imagine, think about it. Some people would be more horrified at the thought of dolphins sitting there breathing on the beach waiting to be killed than they do people.
Yeah, it was not. It was my father was not. I wouldn't describe him as squeamish about those kind of things, but
Well, they were just big old fish,
he
right?
did not. Well, he did not like. He said that was the one job and that he didn't like,
Yeah.
and he had.
Uh-oh. Is this to kill Flipper?
That's for Flipper. It's a harpoon.
Really?
It's a nice one.
So they would have this on a big old thingy, and
You could, and he had someone that wasn't from the porpoise factory, but he had some back when he first started. Guys wanted to try to catch him, and you could, it would attach to a staff here on a handle.
yeah.
The rope went to a barrel, and harpooned the thing, and he'd take off, and the barrel and the rope would go off, and you just chase the barrel until he gave up.
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful piece of. That's an artifact, isn't it?
Yeah, he had 3 of these, and I pulled this one up to the house.
And they would use that for, not particularly that one, but ones like that for porpoise.
Yeah, this probably killed a porpoise.
Did they whale too?
I've never been aware of any whaling that took
Why?
place
Because
around
now
here.
down Diamond City,
They
that's
did.
a big deal.
Yeah, I never heard anyone talk about it ever being anything that they did.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything either. That's interesting.
So I don't have any idea.
Now, how significant has commercial fishing been throughout the years? Is it waxed and waned? Is it, was it a bigger deal before?
It waxes and wanes, and it is a bigger deal when you have no other means of income.
Right.
The reality here now is that there are other ways to make a living.
Right, yeah.
And when I was a kid, that was it. And it was also on the wane, and the population of the village would expand and contract
Mm-hmm.
because if you were here then and there were no other jobs and the fishing wasn't good, you were in a tough time.
Oh, yeah.
When I was a boy, the population of the village was just under 500. Because about once a year, my mother and I would do a census, and we'd set aside a couple of nights, and we'd sit there and we'd start up the road, and we'd just check off in our mind each house and who lived there, and we'd write down the
You
total
would really
number.
write it
Yeah.
down?
Or we didn't necessarily write their names down, but
Right.
we would do a count,
Yeah.
and then we'd get so far and we'd stop and we'd write down where we stopped.
And of course, you probably knew how many people lived in
You
every house.
you knew who lived in every house,
Mm-hmm.
and there was just under 500 people.
I was looking at the collection of photos that the Standard Oil Company had sent the photographer, and you've seen those photos, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
I've got some in my back.
They're beautiful.
The guy's a very good photographer.
And there's one or two of some women walking down the road carrying fish, and he said something to the effect of that it was the tradition that the fishermen's wives could go and pick. They had first pick of the catch.
Oh, yeah.
Did you ever hear about that?
Well, that was true, period. If a commercial fisherman came in, when I was a boy, if a commercial fisherman came in, and they were coming in every day, and you went down to the dock, and they would offer, you want to fish? And you're sitting there with 200 or 300 pounds of fish.
Right.
And you'd say, yes, so help yourself.
Really?
And it was expected that you would get down and just pick out whatever you wanted. I mean, if he had only, say, a sturgeon or one fish, you wouldn't take that one. But if he had, a couple hundred pound of puppy drum or 500 pound of mackerel, you just pick through until you got the one that you want.
Right. There would be supper for that
We
night.
had an old fellow that worked with us for years on the boat, and I'd watch him pick out mackerel. You want a mackerel? Yeah, well, I'll get one. Now, but he would go through 25 mackerel to get one.
What was he looking at?
I have no one knew.
The magic mackerel.
He would get the one that just made him happy.
Wow.
But the commercial fishermen never would say, "Oh well, no, I've got to sell that one." It was just the idea.
Oh,
If you had 20 fish, and somebody came down and said, and that's all you had, and someone said they wanted one for dinner, the idea of selling it instead of giving him a fish for dinner just never occurred.
So the villagers would always have some fish if they wanted some, and just
Always.
Just go down and pick them a fish.
Always.
Because it was an amazing picture of this woman with a bonnet.
Mhm.
She was holding
It was-
this
it
big
was-
old beautiful fish.
It was about a picture taken about probably 150 yards right up there, beyond us. The harbor is so different now, there's no way to see it, but she was walking from there to this, I think, this house right through there. That she was somewhere about probably a couple hundred feet this way of that
And
house.
that's where
that
people
picture.
would, she would walk down into
Yeah.
the center of the
Mhm.
village and all. Did you, when you looked through those pictures, did you know any of those old timers
Mhm.
depicted there?
Yeah.
That
There's one, you see the one with you may have seen the one with the kid poling the skiff across
Yes.
with the gun on. It was
I
a little
think
cowboy
I
gun.
remember that one.
He lives the next house over.
No. That's great. Wow. There's been, where was your home place growing up?
It's on about a third of a mile down the road.
Oh, okay. And were there different sections of the village? Like, on Ocracoke, they always say, well, he lived up Trent or down
Yeah,
Point.
this
Was
from roughly from right about here, right where the boats are on down.
Uh-huh.
All this section of the village was called Sticky Bottom.
Sticky Bottom?
It was low. I mean,
Like that?
half of there'd be one little place like that clump of trees, and then there'd be a path that on normal tide might be damp, and you'd have boards and little wooden footbridges connecting these clumps, basically.
Oh, and
I would say roughly half of the land that you see now, over half of it, if you count these new developments, has been pumped up and created. It was more like the little place next door
right.
and lower.
Uh-huh. And it was Sticky Bottom versus just regular the village. Did
Yeah,
that have
well,
a
that was Sticky Bottom, and then the other place, then you call it up past the red light. Everybody says that's up the road,
up the road?
and then out by the Gulf Station
Uh-huh.
and Rocco's Pizza. Are you familiar with those areas?
Uh-huh.
Well, there's a road that if you turn at the Gulf Station and go out that way. That was the Bread and Coffee Ridge.
The bread and coffee
Bread and Coffee Ridge.
ridge. Why was
Yeah.
it called that?
Well, there's a ridge there. I don't know where the bread and coffee came from. I just knew what they called
Very
it.
nice though, isn't it? Bread and coffee
And
ridge.
then, are you familiar with where the bakery is? Right when you come in the village, Taste Buds.
I think so.
First houses you come to if
Right.
you're coming into the village.
Right.
Well, back over in those trees, you can probably have noticed some what looked to be old island homes.
Mm-hmm.
That was called the Point.
The point.
They lived out. I lived out to the Point.
Oh, okay. That's a lot of different sections for one small village, isn't it? Did people talk about people that, so-and-so lives over at the point, so-and-so Sticky Bottom?
I don't know. I wasn't much aware of that.
Yeah.
And there was probably some of that, just like the Northern and Southern Methodist
Yeah.
churches. But we were all in it together.
Yeah.
Probably one of the things that in reflection on growing up here that I liked is that the difference between the haves and the have-nots was so small that everybody was in it together.
Right.
I liked that, and not ever having experienced the other half of it.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, if you're one of the halves, the other half's all right.
Right.
But I found that to be, I think that was one of the positive benefits of growing up here.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess your father was sort of the forerunner, forethinker or whatever, to come up with this charter boat fleet and catch that wave, huh? I mean, was he one of the very, very first people to do that?
Yes, he wasn't the first one to take people at sport fishing or rod and reeling, as some of them call it. But he was the first one to commit to it as the top priority. What was happening was that commercial fishermen, if they didn't have anything else to do and the fish were not running, they'd take someone sport fishing.
Mm-hmm.
But if they were supposed to take someone sport fishing and the commercial fish showed up, that sport fisherman was out of luck.
Right.
Their first choice was commercial fishing, and that was their priority. And my father, when he had the boats built, he was planning on also commercial fishing, but his commitment was to sport fishing. And if I don't have a charter, I'll go commercial fishing.
Right. Well, you know, when you think about it, I hadn't thought about that, but a lot of the people do that today. You know, they commercial fish when the charter people aren't around, and really that goes way back as a tradition,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And then as a boy, you were taken with your father a lot to go out and help with these charters.
Oh yeah, I wanted to be like Dad.
Right. and then you took over the business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he sent me off to college, and I had a parallel career, but
Where did you go to college?
I went to NC State, and then I was an educator.
Oh, okay. Well, you're a wonderful writer.
Oh, thank
I
you.
mean, based on that article I read, it was very well written and
Oh, thank you.
touching, you know. It's very nice.
Had to kind of be motivated. It's one of those kind of from the heart
That's
things.
kind of writing from the heart.
But
Where did you teach?
I was I taught for 10 years in Raleigh, and then I moved back to the area. My folks were getting old, and I wanted to be here for their last years. And also, the reason I went into education, in part, was so that I could mix. I started off with an interest in science, and I was going to be an engineer. And it took me one semester to cleverly conclude that, gee, I can't be an engineer and also fish all summer. I was not the most perceptive guy there. So I became a science teacher. And then once I got an education, I started looking at my problems were not with science, my problem with all the other stuff. So then I became a school counselor.
Oh, right.
And I worked I was at Matteo High School for a bunch of years.
Yeah.
But while doing that all summer, I fished, and on weekends I fished.
Right. And did you meet your wife here or upstate?
I met my wife on a charter,
Uh-huh.
and I'm divorced. I have kids from a previous wife, but the darkest day of my life turned out to be the best day of my life. My ex-wife was in the process of moving away and taking my kids, which was just horrific. And the best thing for me to do was to go fishing. We had this charter, and about 2 weeks after the charter, I get this note saying, that was really a great day. You know, I'm thinking about coming back. My wife, she was living in London, and she said, I'm going to go on vacation. I might come back to the Outer Banks. And I said, well, gee, maybe we could, I'd be happy to show you around from an Islander's perspective, go out to dinner or something. The rest is history.
Oh.
But it turned out, she's great.
Yeah.
Just
That's
absolutely
really nice.
fabulous.
That's really nice.
I thought my meaningful life was over, and it was kind of just beginning, so that was good.
Yeah. And do your kids live off island?
Yeah. They both graduated from Carolina.
Are they boys, girls?
I have one boy and one girl.
Oh.
My daughter is, in fact, she's in graduate school now at Texas A&M, which is where her mother teaches. And my son he's in the book selling business. He's in Charlottesville right now trying to recruit a sales team for the summer.
Oh my gosh. Who do you think's going to take over the fleet?
No one. I
Really?
think it's going to die. They do not. He doesn't have an interest, and it's this kind of business is a business that, unless you're in love with it or eaten up with it, you just can't do it because there's not a lot of money in it.
What did your father call the albatross?
He quit school after the 9th grade. I think he was about 17 or so. He bounced around. My grandfather was a Menhaden captain.
No kidding.
And
Out of
they
here?
would spend, not out of Beaufort and Southport.
Right, yeah.
So they spend the summers in Hatteras, and in the Menhaden season in either Beaufort or Southport.
Your grandfather that was
Foster,
depicted
yeah.
in that picture was a Menhaden
Yeah,
captain?
yeah. And so my father was bouncing around, but sometime in his schooling, some teacher read to them or had them read the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And he was struck by the description of how graceful the bird was. And also the fact, and this is the one that most people seem to miss, it's unlucky to kill one. Most people, you associate an albatross with bad luck. No, killing one is bad luck.
Yeah, that's right. That's true. So
And
he wasn't making a comment on this business is like an albatross around my neck.
no.
Right.
He was looking for something that was he was looking for something that would represent what he wanted in a boat, the lines, and he never expressed it like that.
Yeah, right.
But he was looking for the grace and the beauty and just how pretty she was.
Right.
And if you ever see the albatross moving in the ocean at just trolling speed, that there is no boat more graceful than that boat.
Really?
I could just stop.
The first one or all?
The first one. The other ones look nice, but the first one, there's something different about that boat. And I've been around it all my life, and I find myself days when I'm fishing and someone else is running or close to me, I just mesmerized.
Do you have people prefer asking that we want this boat and not that boat? Or?
A little bit.
Yeah. Which one do you take out?
I run the Albatross 3 most of the time now.
And then you hire captains for
Yeah.
the others.
Well, the Albatross doesn't run much. She's running a little bit now. I'm gonna activate her more this summer, I think.
Well, in the article you wrote, I thought that was really kind of touched on, that probably resonated with a lot of people around here.
More so than I thought.
Yeah. I mean, 'cause you can really get a sense of, what you wrote about, we have these big structures where basically nobody's even really living there. There are people that come and stay for a little while, but they'll outlive us. These big,
Oh, yeah.
Slash Creek, I guess, and this other big thing. I mean, what do you think? When was the point in time where things started getting a little out of control, and why did it get maybe too out of kilter?
I can give you kind of a critical perspective of that. I tried to write my article in as balanced a manner as I could, and without being too bitter about it. I'm not real happy with some of the changes.
Yeah.
My sense of it, the question of when it got out of control, it was a very gradual progression. The floodgates for Hatteras literally was the collapse of the stock market, with all of these folks who were trying to look for a killing, and it became real estate literally in like the last couple of years.
Oh, recent.
Very recent.
I thought you meant
Now the houses, it was
Right.
moving along, but all of a sudden it was boom in the last couple of years. We were getting there, but we were getting there so slowly. We had kind of mission creep where you don't even realize what's going on.
Right.
And the other part of your question was, why does it happen? Here's Ernie's theory.
Okay.
Most of us are not interested in, most of us worry about not only ourselves, but about how we fit in with those around us. And most of us are not too aggressive in our pursuit of really of anything.
Yeah.
You know, maybe knowledge, care of our families. But a handful of folks want everything they can get.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know what your perspective is, but if you are one of the folks who wants to concern himself with the environment or with ensuring that development is not awful, you have an other job and you do that as a sideline.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the handful of really awful developers, and there's more than a handful, who are unconcerned about the long-term consequences of what they're doing. They want to turn $1 today, and that's it. Well, your job is working with the Park Service. Their job is turning every buildable piece of property into a profit, and turning a property that's marginal into buildable property.
Right.
So you and I get together at night to fight this. If we win, we're only out $10,000.
Right.
This guy goes to bed at night dreaming about how to make his project happen.
Mm-hmm.
He spends 12 hours a day dreaming and scheming, and if he wins, he makes $1 million. If we win, we're out 10,000.
Yeah, that's right.
There is no way ultimately to stop that kind of aggressiveness on the part of a relatively small number of people.
Yeah, and aggressiveness is a good word, because I was trying to think, there's sort of that new sense of wealth, and it's sort of an aggressive wealth, aggressive development, and.
Well, it has happened. It's not just here; it happens everywhere.
Right.
I was really struck by this. My wife and I, winter before last,
Mm-hmm.
we took a brief, middle of winter, we took a brief vacation. We went to Venice, which was interesting in the winter times, neat. But one of the things that I learned was that the population of Venice in the 60s was something like 160,000 year-round residents. It now has a population of like 65,000 or so. All the other properties, and it's wall-to-wall apartments. I mean, it's just one massive city.
Right.
But it's such a destination in the summer months that most of the properties are owned by outsiders.
Oh, gosh.
No different than what I was lamenting here.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not a local phenomenon.
Yeah.
One of the things that happened with me was that I always kind of felt that I could retreat to my home,
Right.
and that we were so remote and so far out of it, and it was so tough to live here
Yeah.
that they wouldn't find us.
Right.
Wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, once we got ESPN, they were going to find us. Anyway, that's just my ramblings about why I think this, the change is taking place.
But with the stock market, I guess interest rates went down and people felt like they could invest.
Well, the property is appreciating just crazily. Well, I am I don't know if I'm afraid or just observing. I think we may have crested, and the guys that got in on it this last little bit, we'll see. The sad reality is that I don't think there's a piece of property available as we speak in Hatteras Village that someone could purchase, put a business on it, operate that business at 120% above the industry average for that business in the world, and justify economically that business. Because I know that the prices for property are so out of kilter with the ability of that property to generate income unless you sell it to a bigger fool.
Right.
Which is exactly what we're doing. The idea is to buy it and then sell it to someone who'll pay you more than you paid for it. This house next door has been sold twice in the last 2 years each time at a significant
Right.
increase.
What's the name of the big development that's cleared and they've stuck these weird little palm trees everywhere when you get off the ferry on the left?
I call it, my name for it is Lonesome Palms Estates.
Why did they pick palm trees? They're not native to Hatteras. Why did they put beautiful? What was there before? Was it dredge spoil?
It was dredge spoil, and before that, it was the prettiest marsh in the village.
Oh,
My
really?
first awareness of red-winged blackbirds and marsh hens
Mhm.
was walking by that marsh when I was a kid.
Okay.
But it's been a dredge spoil for a long time. The actual name of it is Hatteras Harbor, not to be confused with Hatteras Harbor Marina next door.
Oh.
I mean, the people doing that, our good Senator David Hoyle from Gastonia,
Oh, really?
and a guy named Skip Dixon, the developer from Antioch, are just, there's not much class in that development, and I'll put that down for prosperity.
Yeah.
It's awful. I mean, your point, the other thing, if you will notice, they built the gate going in,
Right.
stone, like mountain stone. It ought to be Quail Meadow Run palms. It's hideous.
And the
I mean,
sad thing is there's so much natural beauty here that they should somehow, you know, if you're going to, like you did, you tried to fit, this house fits in beautifully. That's what people want to see. What in the world are they thinking?
there's no accounting for people's aesthetic values.
And they're telling us what the
it's
homes
not
are going to
mine.
look like.
Well, they're also the ones developing the Slash Creek condominium project.
And is that over here?
Yeah. Oh, you can't see it from here, but there were some stands of live oaks, and they originally left them there, and now they plowed all those down. They're
No.
gone. Yep, the
Did they?
last one went today.
Oh, why? Just because it's a lot.
Call Senator Hoyle and ask him what his concept of the beautification of Hatteras Village is. I mean, I don't know.
You know, and the community members, you all get together and try to do what you can do.
You try to do what you can, but I mean, it's unless you have some kind of really rigid covenants, you can't tell someone they can't paint their house purple and pink, or
Yeah.
and that's
Right.
the thing that I find difficult is not that these are my neighbors who are doing this, so I have to live with them. You can get fights with your neighbors,
Right.
but these are people who aren't even going to live here.
Yeah.
See, and once that thing is done and it's sold, they will simply wipe their hands and be gone, and the rest of us are left with whatever they've created. They're not even willing to live with it.
And of course, they don't come to scoping meetings and.
No, that's another. They make sure that they get their appointees on the right committees and commissions, and the pressure is put on the people that have to make the decision.
Yeah, well, must be especially frustrating to the fishermen who, you know, take
Yeah.
on a lot of the blame for this and that.
It's over for the fishermen.
Yes.
We're just the fishermen are just rearranging deck chairs. I mean, that's my sense of it.
Yeah.
And it's
The
tough.
market is so terrible.
Oh,
Right over on the ferry.
it's a combination of things. It's just a combination of factors that are all. It's almost like there's a conspiracy. Actually, they're independent of each other, but it's as if you're a fisherman, you have to feel like there's a conspiracy.
Oh, yeah. On so many different levels, the state, regional, federal, and yeah, I mean, it's really sad. It's really sad to see what's going on there.
Well, it's not my first choice, because growing up around here is just so much a part of it.
Yeah.
And of course, you can wax nostalgic, but that won't bring it back.
What do you think it'll be like here 10 years from now?
If the present trend continues, Hatteras is moving toward a place where it will only be rental units.
Yeah.
The thing that I find difficult about that is that we are so far removed that you're not going to be able to service these without having some kind of local infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, no one, I don't know of anyone who thinks that unless they leave land for their children, that any young person will be able to afford to function here. Perhaps it will become some kind of elite place that the filthy rich will move to, and they'll have little enclaves for their hired help.
Yeah.
But we don't have golf courses, and we don't have great shopping, and you can't get here from there.
Right.
So I find it difficult to see that that will play itself out too well.
Yeah, like it's not like Hilton Head or those islands down there where it's pretty easy access.
It's easy access, and you go 15 mile inland, and you got all the po folk in the world to come do your bidding for you.
Exactly, yeah.
And here, we don't have that option.
No.
Anywhere in Florida, you go down the coast of Florida, and it's golden. You go 10 miles inland, and it's anything but.
Right.
But all these folks can drive, so easy commute to work. And I just see more and more businesses and places that could be viable businesses or home sites
Mm-hmm.
being turned into strictly rental units. And I don't, nothing I can do about it. But
Right.
I mean, I did what I could do. I certainly tried to sound an alarm.
Yeah, yeah.
But what I said, I don't have the energy or the willingness to spend all day, every day, fighting people who do spend all day, every day, trying to make it happen.
Right.
And maybe that's a flaw on my part.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars and connections and
Yeah.
everything else.
And maybe that's a flaw on my part, but it just,
No.
I don't know. Anyway, I just see it becoming, well, I guess a short answer is I think within 20 years, any sense of local flavor or, quote, islanders will be completely gone.
You see that eroding away now?
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
I find myself now, if I'm around someone and I hear some islander, hear an islander accent,
Mm-hmm.
if I go to Ocracoke and hear a couple of Ocracoke, I gravitate toward that.
Yeah.
It's like I have this
Mm-hmm.
tap into something.
Right.
And because there aren't any, my family is mostly gone. I don't sound a lot like that. I come and go, but I don't, I've lost it. But it's every once in a while you'll still hear, quote, a local.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
it's kind of
It's beautiful.
So, and that was just more and more decreasing. I mean, you stop in a place around here now to get gas, to do anything. The chances of you talking to someone who is second generation here is increasingly remote.
Mm-hmm. Especially in the summertime.
Oh, yeah. This time of the year, you're in pretty good shape, but in the
Right. Do you ever feel like you're getting crowded out of your own? I mean, do you still feel like
Oh,
this
yeah,
is a
very.
nice refuge, this house, and your friends and neighbors and family? Or
The last year has been terribly unsettling.
Really?
It's for I think for all of us. See, once Lonesome Palms and Slash Creek went in,
Yeah.
you couldn't pretend anymore that it wasn't going to happen.
Right.
There have been two fish houses torn down. You see that stuff coming. I see it on the water. Most of the guys that I'm fishing with now in the charter fleet are not from here. The guys from someplace else.
Mm-hmm.
Charter industry has become, in Hatteras, it started out as a way for watermen to make a living.
Mm-hmm.
It has gradually evolved to the point, we're now getting to the point with the charter industry, where the charter industry is where loss. There I refer to them as being in the charter hobby.
Ah.
Some guys are in the charter business, they're in the charter hobby.
Yeah, trust fund babies. I like that. Is it a tax dodge for them, basically?
I don't know. I don't.
Some-
So,
do.
in some cases it is,
Yeah,
but in a lot of cases it's something to do.
right.
These are, you get young men who have significant amount of wealth behind them, and it's something they can do in which they are making people happy. They're providing a service. Fishing, it can be as a passion. You just kind of get eaten up with it.
Yeah,
So they're providing a service to the customers. They're doing something they enjoy, and it doesn't cost them so much,
right.
which is a very different perspective than, well, I didn't make much, but I made something. At least I fed my family.
Yeah.
Their perspective is, well, it didn't cost the family empire but $20,000 this year. I did good.
Oh gosh. Wow.
I mean, that's a different world than the world I grew up in, it was all watermen.
Uh-huh.
When I was a kid on the water, the only voices you heard on the radio were watermen. And now when I hear some Corsanders out there, I used to, they were there and we were here and we were kind of competitors. Now I kind of, man, it was a Corsander. You get closer.
Yeah.
But up in this way, largely guys are not originally from here, and the number of watermen, the sheer number of watermen, and even more so the percentage of watermen, of people on the water that are watermen, has decreased dramatically.
In the last how many years?
Well, it's been decreasing all the time. Over the last 20 years, it has really plummeted. And to me, a waterman would be at least a second generation guy whose father was on the water and he grew up with it.
Well, I live in Gloucester, and it seems like in communities like Atlantic and Cedar Island and Harper's Island, that there's more full-time commercial fishermen. Nowadays, they're really having a hard time, but they're still trying to be full-time. Whereas in this area, it seems like people, there's more part-time commercial fishermen, or they can go in and out.
You could do tourism is a bigger deal here.
Right. I guess that's
Much bigger deal here. Those communities are still, and I don't know many folks down there, but those communities are still relatively intact communities, still functioning much as they did 30 years, certainly as they did 30 years ago.
Right.
And this area, it's changed.
Yeah.
It's the change. The place I grew up doesn't exist anymore.
And yet, all this money has come in, but it hasn't necessarily been good money.
Well, it has provided some benefits, but it's provided. You don't want to mistake a change for progress.
Yeah.
Right. Your house burning down is a change.
Right, but it's not progress. Yeah.
And it is, the money that has come in, for the most part, has come from other sources. It hasn't contributed to the community. It was not created by people in the community, with just very few exceptions.
Right.
And it's a very different circumstance. The villages, the Outer Banker, all for better or for worse. I mean, those characters are gone. There's still a few here.
Right.
But
Have
they're
you
dying
seen your
off.
father's interview, by the way? Have you read his interview?
No. I have some other things. I was fortunate in that some fellows from Channel 8 and High Point. Are you familiar with Roy Ackley? Roy's folks?
No.
David Weather. They do good stuff. It's kind of a Charles Perrault type thing.
Oh, right.
And they interviewed my father and my uncle, who was dying of leukemia. In fact, they showed up here the day that he found out that he was a walking dead man. And 2 days later, they interviewed him. They wanted to go out fishing on the boats. They were taken by the boats. And I said, well, here's the deal. I'll take you fishing, but only if you'll do an interview with my uncle.
Okay.
And I have that interview, and it is professionally done.
Right. And what was your uncle's name?
His name was Bill Foster.
Bill Foster.
Yeah.
Are you related to the Bill Foster that is alive today, who's very involved with the marine fisheries?
No, he lives right here.
And you're not.
No, we're not
You're not
kin.
kin with him?
No, he's from Florida. He's one of those Florida Fosters.
Ah.
I've known, in fact, when he first came to Hatteras doing research as a graduate student at NC State, he rented a house. The house he rented was right here. He rented from a father, so I've known him literally from the time he showed up.
Right.
He and I are good friends.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice. I've heard him testify on and off. And
Yeah,
for the last 3 years, I've been a member of the Marine Fisheries Commission. And when you're talking about the charter stuff, it interests me kind of separate from this project because at our last meeting we were talking about a group of charter boat fishermen want a license. And
yeah.
so
In fact,
about that.
I was at that meeting in Manteo, and it's we don't want a license. What you really want is to have some kind of control and to stop the proliferation of everybody and his brother becoming a charter boat operator.
Right, like a cap on the number.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
two other states actually do cap the number. Alaska caps the number of charter boat fishermen.
and it's everybody and his brother. When it gets into whole taxation,
Right.
politics.
I'll get out of your hair.
That's quite all right. Welcome to stand have supper with us.
Oh, thank you. That's really nice. But I'm going to meet my friend up in Buxton.
Oh, okay, good. You've got somewhere to go tonight.
Yeah.
So the whole issue, what we are doing, and among the things that we're doing by allowing everybody and his brother to become a charter boat captain, is we are decreasing the taxes paid on all these electric boats.
How is that?
Instead of it being your own private boat, it's now a business, which means when you buy a part, you don't have to pay sales tax on it.
Oh, okay.
That's one simple thing. You also, for income tax, you can now depreciate your $1 million boat.
And do they have to pay fuel gas?
No.
Fuel tax?
It's a business.
So sportsmen do, but then if you call yourself a charter boat, you don't.
Correct.
And all you have to do is say on the
Well,
charter
you had to have a charter license.
Okay.
But if you have a charter license and say you're in business,
Right.
then every part you get away from the sales tax, the whole bit.
Yeah, that's
Well, now you got to have a commercial license. But if you go to one of those guys down the sign who can't make it,
right.
and say I'll give you $1,000 or $3,000 for that license on that 16-foot skiff you've got that you've been mullet fishing in, and the guy says it's a deal. You now keep up that license each year, and when you blow up a $100,000 1,000-horsepower engine in your sport fishing boat, you write it off as a commercial fishing deal.
Right. Right. Gosh. I remember you at that Manio meeting. I was sitting in there. I didn't get a chance to talk to you.
No, I was the one that got a little irritated over how come it got dropped.
What were you saying, that if you catch a striped bass out?
Oh, that's I don't know if you want it to record or not, doesn't make a difference. That's a federal regulation. It's against the law to have in your possession a striped bass beyond 3 miles.
Right.
Every state in the union allows you to keep striped bass, but you can't keep them outside of 3 miles.
That's the EEZ.
Well, it's the state waters go to 3 miles.
Mm-hmm.
Federal waters go from 3 miles out to 200, which that's the EEZ, from
Right.
3 to
Okay.
200.
Yeah.
The feds will not let you possess a striped bass beyond 3 miles,
Okay.
which means if you have one in the boat and want to go out 3 miles, then in order to be, it's legal to have him in the boat and it's legal to throw him overboard. So you throw him over and you go outside of 3 miles. You didn't come back in, you can catch another one, and you're still legal. You haven't done anything wrong.
Right.
However, if you catch one and take him outside of 3 miles and bring him back in, only kill that one fish, but go outside of 3 miles and in the boat, you are wrong.
So you could actually do that all day.
You could do it all day.
Catch it here, go throw it out, and so you could be out there,
Yeah.
catch another one here, go
Yeah.
on whatever, and you can. But then if you catch one out there,
And keep it and put it in the boat, you're in trouble.
right? There's
And
just so many.
well, there's so many twists and turns that
Yeah.
it's very difficult.
And then isn't there a difference between whether you catch it on the ocean and then if you run around to the sound?
Yeah, well, that's a different, and part of that, I have no problem with that because the contention is that they're biologically different stocks.
Right.
That's okay. The thing that I struggle with is putting people in jeopardy, or actually it's not so much putting them in jeopardy, it's creating situations where you, instead, in the name of conserving the fish, you're creating a situation in which you're likely to kill more fish.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm up there fishing and literally hooked a tuna, which would happen, and he drew me off, and I'm either going to break the law or throw my fish.
Right.
Well, I hope that's not the intent.
Yeah.
To one, stop me from fighting the bluefin, or two, encourage me to kill more bass.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a simple, practical thing.
Right, yeah.
At that meeting that night, the thing that irritated me was the idea of, see, we once had a license way. I got my answer. It went away because of
Mark Bass night?
the guy who was
That's the answer I always get from my questions.
who was the still is Bob Lucas.
Yeah, he's not on the commission.
No, but he was on the commission when that went off.
He was.
And see, there was no discussion about you're not going to have a license. On the one hand, it's nice because all of a sudden I don't have to buy one.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, it's bad because anybody and his brother can now run charters in North. And what I heard, that guy, when I pressed him and he got a little feisty about it, well, we had input. Well, from who? Well, Bob Lucas said.
Right. Yeah, I always heard that it was part of the reform package. Now the General Assembly and chewing everything over, certain things got
That's exactly right, but it should not have been part of the, quote, reform package. It was an attempt by the CCA to do what it could do to ensure that we were going to have a saltwater license.
Oh, right.
And I don't know all the politics of it. I mean, I didn't have any kind of intrigue. I wanted my question answered. I thought it was a fair question.
Yeah.
And I got my answer.
Right.
The charter industry had input. Lucas and two or three of his cronies said, this is the input. And everyone else either believed them or said, oh, we're covered.
Right. You think the CCA wanted the charter boat license because it was another, they were trying to get everybody licensed?
They wanted a different kind of license.
They wanted a saltwater.
Saltwater, and the charter boat industry had said, in effect, we're willing to go with a license, but only if it's a blanket license. We didn't want to be in the position of having to check everyone's license before they got on our boat, or having to sell a license each morning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That we were willing to pay $500 a year or $10, whatever the fee was.
Mm-hmm.
We could then raise our rates $2 a day or whatever we wanted to do.
Right.
And off our boat was fishing under our blanket license for the day.
Right.
Administratively, it made sense.
Uh-huh.
From an enforcement perspective, it made sense.
Yeah.
In terms of public relations, it made sense.
Right.
But it didn't fit the agenda of some of the folks.
Yeah. It sounds like maybe it'll eventually go through after all.
But at this point, I mean, we're just overrun with everybody and his brother. The horses out of the barn.
Yeah. Let me ask you something. I've always wondered this. I mean, you've brought people fishing your whole life on these charter boats. Do you have any observations to make about people? I mean, what are they looking for in a charter?
Oh.
What are they types or just working class folks from upstate that just want freedom on the water? I mean, what are they so?
Why do people like to? I don't know. I pop sociology, pop psychology answers, I guess. I don't know. There's lots of different things. I'm not, to have been a school counselor, I'm not real politically correct.
That's good.
I happen to think that there are a lot of primal urges and needs that folks have.
Uh-huh.
And I think that hunter-gatherer is not just a concept.
Right.
And there is something, and this is for everyone, and it isn't just guys, though many more males and females get moved by the experience. There is something, it stirs something very primal when you are literally in contact with that live creature.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a part of it. And you get the challenge. Certainly, the charter guys are in it for the challenge. And it also is if you to fascinated talking with some of the old fishermen who were very inarticulate.
Right.
But they were experiencing, a lot of them, the same things as a very articulate poet. When they would see a sunset or a sunrise or a rainbow or a storm, all the different things you see, they were that.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't start gushing out
Right.
with a bunch of words. But, I mean, they'd say, boy, that was some pretty.
Yeah.
And that's all they would say, but all of that is part of it.
Right.
And it's very difficult to capture that.
You don't have to
I
be
can offer you a glass of wine or a glass of Fresca or some ice cold glass. But I didn't have anything. We're getting ready to go to the store, so the show, so I've been letting everything kind of wind down in the fridge.
Right.
Yeah. Would you like a glass of red wine?
No, fine, thank
Okay.
you. I really am going to get out of your
Good,
hair.
I like to have some.
Okay.
But I think that you just something, when you are in a city and everything revolves around a controlled environment, being in a position where you're a little bit on the edge, where you know that you're in contact with something that is grander than you or more wild than you or stronger than you, and that you have a little bit of temporary mastery of it, it's a fancy word. It's very affirming. And for a lot of people, I think that's part of it.
Right, and so people get the same thrill of, the thrills in the catch, not necessarily bringing home fish, right? They're just as happy to release.
Many of them, it depends. I mean, there are different kinds of people in it for different reasons. You have game hogs who just want to kill something, the awful folks. You have other folks who just simply, if they catch something, what's that saying? And you see, a bad day of fishing is better than a good day at work.
Yeah, right.
I mean, there are lots of people who just want to get out and get away from the pressures and also make contact with this part of themselves that just stays buried all the time.
Do you ever have people suddenly just start spilling all this stuff to you that you wouldn't expect because they're out here and
A little bit, but not really.
Yeah.
Guys don't tend to do that very
right.
much.
So you're not as lucky as the bartenders who have to hear all that stuff all the time.
No, I don't get a lot of that. I think, to me, one of the more interesting observations, in my mind, it's interesting. I don't know that there are many places, many groups that are necessarily much more chauvinistic than a bunch of fishermen.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of like that.
Yeah.
One of the things that I find interesting, and you get a lot of charter boat guys, a lot of them have a lot of swagger and ego and showing off their gold marlin chain or whatever, which is a part of the industry, a trend that I really don't like. It's
Right.
very different from the way I was raised. But even with that, it is interesting if you ask them, who would you rather take fishing, a bunch of men or a bunch of women? They all say women. And it has nothing to do.
All right, I like that.
It has nothing to do with, oh, they're women. It has everything to do with they will pay attention. You can teach them.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
If you tell a woman, here's what you need to do, she's all ears, and she does it. A bunch of young guys, I fished once 10 years ago. I know all about this.
Right.
And to have a bunch of guys who could probably fairly be put on close to the end of the chauvinist scale.
Yeah.
And one of the things they clearly recognize is that men are really hard-headed about fishing.
Right. Gosh. That's funny.
And you check that out with any guy that fishes.
Yeah. Well, maybe I should stop the interview now. Is there anything you wanted to add? I feel like since we're drinking wine, I shouldn't tape.
No, not really. Other than the, I think one thing, and I don't necessarily add that to the interview, but in talking with my grandmother one time, when you talk about changes on the island, we were talking about the way that it was when I was a boy, and someone asked her, or I don't know if I asked her who, what was the most important change you have seen on the island?
Right.
And she said the consolidation of the schools.
Really?
And why? She says because when they consolidated the schools, all the kids got to know each other better, and we started getting along better.
Oh.
That was from village to village.
Right, that brought everybody together, didn't
Yeah.
it? Wow.
And that was a real challenge. I remember when I went to, the schools consolidated when I was in the 5th grade.
Mm-hmm.
I started 5th grade at the consolidated school in
So then you
Buxton.
had to take a bus to Buxton.
Yeah. But we were pretty clear that we were going to have trouble with these other people. There were going to be fights and problems with the other villagers. And I thought to me that was interesting with my grandmother to pick that as the most
Consolidation of
significant,
schools.
because it brought the island together.
Right. And I want to ask you
How
something.
about your website?
Hmm.
I heard you complimenting on his writing. He did
Yeah.
most of the writing on the new website.
Oh.
So you might want to have a look. They've got the history on there as well. But that is, in fact, I gave all the editing to Buddy today.
Okay.
A lot of scanning and scanned.
Is
a
this
lot of glitches.
HattersOnMyMind.com? I have seen. That is a beautiful website.
They're the same guys, and they've just finished one for Ernie.
Oh, great! Because they came down the decoy festival. People
Yeah,
were
they're
trying
doing
to
one over there too, I
Horse
think.
Sound.
Mhm.
You're not supposed to call it a decoy festival, but Horse Sound Museum.
Also, a friend of ours who's a producer up in High Point did a nice little short video, 7-minute video or something.
Oh,
It's
and
fun. You'll enjoy it.
oh, thank you so much. That's wonderful. That's great. One thing I forgot to ask is, in all this, the changes that have taken place, how significant was the Park Service's role, in your opinion? I mean, did they help usher in change, or, I mean, I get people seem to be a little ambivalent about the
I'm
role.
not.
Okay, go for it. Lay it on me.
The Park Service saved us from ourselves.
Wow. Is that upon retrospect?
Well, it was upon retrospect, but my folks were not nearly as opposed to it, my family, even though it cost us some money up in Waves because we owned oceanfront, which we were paid not particularly well for.
Right.
But imagine this island with that Park Service. I mean, I am continually flabbergasted when I hear people, signed off. The Park Service is not great, and their public relations club with a nail driven through it to try to soothe people's feelings. They're terrible.
Yeah.
But envisioning this place without the Park Service, I mean, all the islanders know that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's easy to be mad at the Park Service and take pot shots at them because you want to gripe at somebody.
Right.
And oftentimes they don't do a very good job. They do a terrible job in terms of PR, in my judgment.
Mm-hmm.
But hell, independent of that, where would we be? We could be Nag's Head.
Right.
I mean, it would be awful.
Yeah.
And it's just, you know, I am fascinated by the foresight of the various groups that had all these hunting clubs and large tracts of land.
Mm-hmm.
They own large tracts of the island were owned by industrialists or wherever.
Right.
And all of these folks decided we need to give this to the Park Service.
Oh, you mean much of the land that is park now?
Oh, yeah.
Is turned over by these.
The Phelps family owned all of Cape Point. The Gooseville Gun Club owned from the ferry dock down to the inlet. Pea Island Wildlife Refuge was owned by some hunting club. There were large tracts of the island that were not owned by islanders.
Wow. Okay.
And I mean, these people gave this land to the government. And it's kind of hard to envision in this day and age that kind of contribution.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, yeah, I like trees better than I do houses, and it kills me when I see. It's tough.
Right.
And I look at the, I mean, if it, you know, hell, you didn't have a beach to look at. You just have a damn bunch of houses on it.
Well, when I took that flight, I mean, I was just struck. It's like there's this line. You need
Well, that's it.
and then this line and beautiful nothingness.
And then the Park Service owns that.
Yeah.
And so
Was it
I
here? Yeah, I guess it was along Hatteras Village Beach that Dwight was saying. This is what we call Millionaire's Row.
Mhm.
And there are these huge boom, 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 pool. Like everybody, it's funny to see it from the air. You know.
it is. And I'm not the right person to ask because I'm operating boats that are vintage boats and the things that I think are important are maybe not, they're not all just material or monetary.
Right.
But anyone who argues that we'd be better off without the Park Service,
Yeah.
they can't see. But the single biggest factor in the change of this island, in changing the island, was the bridge.
Oh,
So that opened things up.
right.
That opened
Pipeline.
things. That was the pipeline. Yeah, they opened a valve.
Yeah. Well, you said that the Park Service could improve their public relations. Do you have any recommendations? Because they're real interested in knowing how they can make improvements.
Oh gosh, I got comes and goes in my mind. Let's think of some specifics. I say that, and I don't have anything. It is in and out of my mind. I'll give you a for example of
Okay.
something. They're redoing the Weather Bureau out here. Somebody from the Park Service could, when the Hatteras Civic Association, could find out when the Civic Association is meeting and make a little presentation about where it is and where it isn't and how come,
Yeah.
and offer to do it rather than be asked to do it.
Right.
And there has been, and there's no cover up or unwillingness to do it, but it's the kind of thing, instead of us having to say something or it be some kind of political statement, Hey, we're doing this thing in their village, and there's been discussion back and forth about how it's going to be used, and
Right.
and they're not sure, and we're not sure, and it's kind of up in the air.
Yeah.
And the village is happy that it's being done.
Yeah.
But instead of saying, why don't we let these folks know?
Right.
I mean, that's the kind of thing. Be proactive rather than reactive. I guess
Yeah.
that's what I would
Right.
look for.
Yeah, I understand that.
And just look for ways to kind of make them, make yourself look good. One of the things that they did, and what's her name, Mary Dahl.
I don't know.
So she's with the Park Service.
Yeah.
And I was went to one of the meetings up in Roanoke Island because they're struggling with the growth issues as well
Right.
now.
Yeah.
And she came introduce herself to me and mentioned the article and said, I really appreciate it. She said, this spurred me or us to think about trying, the idea of preserving some of the villages, and they may have sent a letter to the commissioners.
Oh,
Now, that's proactive.
that is.
And I'm very appreciative of that. And she said, your article kind of spurred it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the other half of it, I'm sitting here thinking, the Park Service is about the business of managing people and resources. That's all over the country.
Mm-hmm.
They had to deal with this. They have, that's their area of expertise.
Right.
So I write something and they go, oh, good idea.
It's scary in a way that they're not.
So when I say being more proactive,
Yeah.
the Park Service is always in a defensive bureaucratic mode,
Right.
and that's not something that happens only locally. It happens. It's the bureaucratic structure of the Park Service.
Mm-hmm.
You don't ruffle feathers, and you go march by the book.
Yeah, I see the same thing with marine fisheries, and I think that
Yeah.
government, bureaucracy, and everybody's just kind of, keeping a low profile and doing their job.
And anyone and any minion who says, but this doesn't make sense, that's the end of your progression in that organization.
Right.
I don't function too well because I go to the things like you saw me up there and I'm asking, who made it, and the guy got really defensive.
Yeah.
But he gave me my answer. He didn't mean to, but he gave me my answer.
Yeah.
And the question was a valid question,
Right.
but the guy immediately is on the defensive
Mm-hmm.
and is denying that what I'm saying is valid.
Mm-hmm.
This was a straightforward, out in the open procedure,
Yeah,
and
right.
it was, but the decision was not straightforward out in the open. It just all of a sudden it dropped on us. The
Yeah.
decision to rescind the license requirement,
Yeah.
it wasn't discussed.
No.
He knows it. I know it.
Right.
And he knows I know
It
it.
was a political something.
It was a political something or other, and
Yeah.
you come to this meeting, you ask this question.
Right. And his job is to run defense.
Yeah.
Right.
So
And so the Park Service kind of, in a way, they're not as plugged into the community. They're sort of operating independently.
they operate
Yeah.
independently. Now, a reality is that they got to deal with folks like Carol Dillon, who Park Service screw you, Park Service screw you, Park Service evil. What's the
Right.
personification of evil? You spell evil, P-A-R-K,
Yeah.
S-E-R.
Mhm.
So now, when you have that on a regular basis, it's hard not to get defensive.
Right.
But if you are the professional and you are operating this massive system that is impinging upon all that work there and live there, even though you think you're right and they're wrong, what does it cost you to throw out olive branches?
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
nothing but good could come from that.
What does it cost you to contact the civic association and say, we'd like to give you an update on this?
Yeah, right.
Or we'd like to give you an update on why there's no update.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, what's that cost?
Nothing.
So and those are the kinds of things that would smooth some rough edges.
Mm-hmm.
Most people will be swayed by the better argument. And when a bunch of guys are sitting around cussing the Park Service, they're a bunch of damn, they never paid attention. Well, if you know that they paid attention and you know they try to do the right thing, just because some hothead running your mouth doesn't mean you're going to vote for the hothead.
Right. Yeah.
I just, my idea of how to keep organizations happy is different from a lot of people that run the Park Service.
Yeah. It's too bad the Park Service couldn't have some kind of role in cultural preservation in the face of all this raging development.
And in absolute defense of them, sending a letter to the commissioners expressing their interest in and their encouragement of preserving the culture of the cultural identity of the village. I think I used the term cultural identity.
Yeah, that's great.
That was, to me, it's very positive.
Yeah, definitely. That's what they ought to be in the business of.
Well, here, in this, they need to have someone here whose job is to be culturally sensitive.
Right. Right.
I mean, it seems to me that would be a contribution.
Yeah.
And when they have to fight these awful battles over beach access and all this mess, they would have a little bit of currency in the bank.
Right. Yep.
But then that's my opinion, and
Yeah.
I'm not spending much time fighting with the Park Service. I was worried about that.
What shipwreck did you say this table was from?
I don't know. I wish I did, but I don't.
It's beautiful. Don't you wish you knew the whole story?
Yes, I do.
Your little fly on this table when it was.
Yes, I do. There've been a lot of elbows on it.
Sure has. Do you remember seeing Rex as a child, or?
A few.
Yeah.
Some of the not schooners, not wooden shipwrecks, other than a fishing boat or two, and the LSTs went ashore. I've seen 6 or 8, but with reliable engines and modern electronics, those shipwrecks are a thing of the past.
Right. Yeah, except for the occasional sailboater that gets.
Yeah. Well, I've seen 8 or 10 sailboats come ashore, but
Right.
smaller boats come ashore. But as far as the traditional shipwreck schooner,
Yeah.
I mean that's history.
Yeah. Okay, I think I'm gonna